welcome to another Every Tuesday tutorial. In this week's tutorial, we're creating a watercolor four-leaf clover directly in Procreate. So what you see on screen is exactly what we're going to be creating together. Normally at this point, I would say that the free color palette's in the video description, but we're actually not using a color palette this week, and I'll explain why that is in just a minute. For this entire project, we'll be using my paid set of watercolor illustration brushes, and I'll leave a link in the video description to that set. I'm going to start by creating a canvas that's 1500 pixels by 1500 pixels at 300 dpi. I work in the display P3 color profile, but if you're on an older iPad and don't have access to that, then the default sRGB color profile is perfectly fine. Okay, I've got my brand new canvas all ready to go, and the first thing we want to do is go grab our source image. That way everything we do looks like a real four-leaf clover. So I'm going to head into Pinterest. I am on my flower reference photos board within Pinterest, and you'll see that the four-leaf clover right now is right up here at the top. If you're watching this at a later time, you may need to scroll down a little bit, but I promise it will remain on this board. So just tap on that, and then when you bring it up, just hit the three dots and then hit download image, and that will save it to your camera roll. And now that it's saved to my camera roll, I'm going to head back into Procreate. To add it into our document, I'm going to hit the wrench up here, go to the add category, and then hit insert a photo and grab it from your camera roll. Okay, I like to zoom out a little bit, that way I see the size of it in relation to the rest of my canvas. And I actually think the default size is pretty good. I think I could even shrink it down just a tad. I do know that I want to make the stem just a little bit longer. I don't like how short it is there, but that's an easy fix. Everything else is looking pretty good. And it doesn't matter that there's a watermark on it, because we're just going to trace the outline of the clover and borrow some of the colors off of it, and then that's all we're going to use it for. So once you have it in position, just deselect it by hitting your cursor icon, and now we're going to trace the outline of it. So I am in that watercolor illustration brush set. I'm going to select my sketching pencil up here, and I'm going to use black for this. So just double tap where black is and you'll get true black. So I'm going to come in here, and so let's create a brand new layer for our sketch layer. I'm going to label this one sketch, and then it could be a little bit hard to see along the edge. So I'm going to reduce the opacity of this background of this source photo. I'm going to come down to we'll come down to 70%, and my brush size is at 6%. So all I'm going to do is come around the contours of my clover. And I'm going to draw in the center detail, but the veining within the leaves of this clover, it's just too detailed. I'm going to leave it less detailed than that. If you want to include those, you can. I'm going to leave them out. So since I know I want to extend my stem, I'm just going to include that as part of my sketch layer. So I'm just going to bring it down just a little bit further here. Turning the background image on and off. We'll zoom out, and that looks good. And it also doesn't look very centered right now. So now that I have my sketch layer and this is all I need, I'm going to keep it selected and then center this. And if you have uniform down here with snapping toggled on, when you move it, you'll get those crosshairs to let you know where it's centered. So right there. And now I'm going to turn my background image back on. I'm going to increase the opacity all the way up. I'm going to reduce the size of it and just stick it up here in the corner. If it bothers you that there's the rest of the photo down here, you can crop that off really easily by just dragging the photo down where you want it cropped and then deselecting it and reselecting it again, and that will crop it off. So if I want to take the rest of this off up here, that just gives me exactly what I need instead of all that extra information that I'm not using. So I'm just going to leave this up here, and this is for my color references. As we work, we're going to eyedrop colors off of this, which is why we don't need a color palette for this one. We're pulling it directly from the photo, and we're going to be using a variety of different greens. So it would be kind of hard to keep track of all those greens. It's much easier and quicker to just eyedrop them. Now we're going to color block everything, and then we're going to add in all of the details. So I'm going to create a brand new layer right above my sketch layer. And this one we can just label color blocking. And I'm going to grab my medium paint round brush. And what I like to do is I always do the furthest back leaf first, because as we paint around, everything will end up going on top of the next one. So I always look at which one's the furthest back, and right here it's this one, and then It doesn't look like I have any others that overlap. It just looks like this one back here. So I just need to make sure that I paint this back one first and then I can paint the other ones. So this is where the color dropping comes in. So you want to hold this little icon right here with your finger and then drag over where you're going to grab color. And what I always do is find a mid-tone. So just the general color of this. Obviously we have some highlighted areas and some darker areas. I go for the one that's kind of in the middle that makes up the majority of the leaf. And we're going to add in the shadows and the highlights afterwards. So we just want those mid-tones. And I'm going to do that for every leaf. This one's a little bit large of a size. I'm going to come down to 10%. And with these brushes, in order to maintain that texture throughout, you're just going to want to keep your stylus on the screen the entire time as you're painting. That way that texture is consistent. Lift up only when you're done painting and filling everything in. Okay, once you have that leaf done, now we're going to color drop every single leaf. That way we have that little bit of a color shift throughout, and it's just going to look more realistic that way. So I'm going to hold the little icon on the left and then grab a mid-tone color again. That looks pretty good. And then paint this one in. All right, moving on. For the stem, I'm going to paint that in separately since it comes behind it. And if you look in the photo, you can even see the stem through this leaf. So I want to draw that separately behind the layer that this leaf is on. So I'm going to create a brand new layer right underneath the color blocking layer. So tap on your sketch layer, create a brand new layer, and just label this one stem. And we can grab the color again. You can see that we've got a lighter green right here, and then this one's a bit darker. So we're just going to keep that in mind as we work. So up here, I'm going to grab this lighter color, and you can see where these join right here, they're actually a little darker. So I'm going to grab those ones first, and we'll paint in where they join. And then we'll switch to this color right here for this part. And then as it moves down, we're going to switch to this green. So I'm going to paint the rest of the way in that green. And if this transition is a little hard, it's definitely a little hard for me, you can transition them a little better with, let's try the spot bleed brush. I'm going to reduce the size down here, and if I kind of stipple with it and push, I can blend them more seamlessly right here. And that looks much better. Okay, let's preview how this looks so far. Let's turn off our sketch layer, so just uncheck it. And if we zoom out, you can see that's looking pretty nice. The next thing we're going to do is add in these lines along the different leaves. And you can see that all of them are pretty dark except for this leaf right here. So we're going to keep that in mind. So for each one of these, we're going to draw the lines up and then smudge them a little bit. And then for this one, if you think in terms of regular traditional watercolor, having a lighter color right here is the absence of color. So it would be counterintuitive to add on a lighter color on top of what we already have. So we'll actually be removing the color from this area and then we'll smudge it, and that will give the impression that it's lighter without us actually painting that color in, that lighter color in. So we'll take care of these larger leaves first and then we'll come back to this one afterwards. So we're going to create a brand new layer right above the color blocking layer and label this one Leaf Details. I'm going to use my round liner brush for this, and the size of my brush is going to be 8%. And let's come in here, hit this little icon again on the left, and then grab one of the darker areas. And we can turn our sketch layer back on and follow these lines down. Let's turn our sketch layer off so we can see what we've got. And let's compare. Down here, you can see where it gets closer to where all of them meet, they get a lighter shade. So right now we're just going to focus on the darker areas. So that's why I stopped it short, right down here where they all join. And now we're just going to smudge these a little bit to soften up that hard line. So for my smudge brush, I'm going to select my spot bleed brush and just paint along this edge, right along that line. And that will soften it up, but still maintain a line right here. And the more you go over it, the more you can reduce how hard of a line it is. If I come to the edge, it's going to remove that edge of the line right there and soften it. So that can really give you volume immediately, which is pretty nice. So paint down the line, and then wherever you need to reduce it, as it starts getting lighter right here, I'm going to reduce the line. So I'm going to push in on the edge. So the absence of color right here pushes into color, so it reduces the amount of color that's there. And the harder you press on this one, the larger the smudge becomes. So keep that in mind too. So now I can soften that edge. So it still looks darker here, but it's softer on this edge because I'm pushing into it. Let's zoom out, see how it looks from far away, and compare to our original. Obviously, this is an illustration of this one, so I'm not going for hyper realistic, but I want this painterly, very consistent look compared to the source photo. So I like how that's looking. And the next thing I want to do is just add a little bit of shading up here towards the top. You can see I've got some dark areas right here where it kind of pinches in, and over here. And then this one doesn't have that at all, so we're just going to avoid this leaf for now. We're going to come back to it. So let's focus on these shadow areas. So I'm going to create a brand new layer on top of my leaf details layer, label this one shadows, and we're going to grab our medium paint round brush for this, and I'm going to grab the color up here, and I'm just going to paint like a V. And we're going to smudge this so it blends into the background color really nicely. So I'm just looking at the shape of this and doing something similar here. This one's a little more subtle, so this one will be a smaller V. And then for this last one, let's look at that one. So this one's pretty soft too, and I'm going to grab this color because this looks like a softer green. And now we can smooth those out just like we did with our lines. So grab your smudge tool, grab your spot bleed, and I can just paint along this edge to soften it and pull it out and push it in. And remember, the harder you press, the more significant that smudge will become. Zoom out to see how that's looking. It's feeling pretty good. I think this one could come a little lower. I'm noticing over here that it comes basically to here. So I'm just pushing this color further down, and then I'll stipple the edges to blend it more seamlessly. And remember, you can always change the size of your brush too. If it's feeling like too minor, or you can see the little areas where you're smudging or stippling, just increase your brush and you'll have larger smudge areas, and that can blend it a lot more seamlessly too. Now I said that we were going to come back to this one, so we're going to do this one next, and then we're going to add in this little ring detail around the center. And then we'll just add some finishing details and we'll be done. So in order to add this negative line, we talked about the absence of color right here, creating that lighter color. We're going to come to our color blocking layer, and you can use the eraser tool if you'd like. A more non-destructive form of doing this would be layer masking, which is what I'm going to use. And I also want to show you how you can smudge a layer mask, which is a really handy tip. So I'm just going to tap on my color blocking thumbnail and choose mask. We're going to paint in black right here, and that's just going to hide the color. It's putting a mask on it. So I'm going to grab my black, so double tap where black is, and I'm going to switch over to my round liner brush. So it's very similar to what we did with these ones. And you'll remember that we used a size 8 round liner when we were creating these darker lines. So I'm painting in black on the layer mask layer with the round liner brush at a size, it still should be 8%. Yeah, it's still 8%. I can turn on my sketch layer, that way I follow that existing line down. And that's all I need to do. So I can turn off my sketch layer, and now I'm going to smudge this. So I can smudge it in the same way. Let me make sure I still have my spot bleed brush, and I can stipple this out. And I'm going to reduce the size a little bit and follow it down. And let's compare up here. And you can see with smudging, it's not white here. It's still a lighter shade of green because we're blending this color in. So the next thing we're going to do is add this ring, really light colored ring right here. So just make sure you're still on the layer mask layer. I am going to switch over to my medium paint round brush, and I'm still painting with black because we're hiding the color on these layers. So I'm going to look at this and draw it freehand around here. If you want to add onto your sketch layer where this appears, you could do that too. Once you have that ring in there, now we're just going to smudge again. And then the last thing that we have to do is just add in some finishing details. So I like adding a little bit of messiness to it. So I'm going to turn off my reference photo. I don't need that anymore. Everything that we do from this point, we can add to the background layer except for our final paper texture, which we'll add on top. So for the background details, we're going to create a brand new layer right above our sketch layer, and we'll just label this one messy. For the messy details, I like using my dense wash brush, and you can just grab any color green that you'd like. I'm going to grab this mid-tone of this leaf over here. So once again, hit that icon, grab the color, and I'm just going to add a little bit of messy detail over here. And the size of this dense wash brush is 10%. Don't go overboard. It's really easy to go overboard with this, but I'm just going to add just a little bit here and there. And then we're going to add in some splatter details. So I'm going to create a brand new layer, label this one splatter. We'll start with the bleeding splatter brush. Once again, grab any color. I'm going to grab a little bit lighter of a color for this. Let's see, that's too big. Let's see what size works good. I'm going to come down to 10%. That looks pretty good. And just put a few splatters around here. And then I'm going to switch to my rounded splatter brush. Change to a darker green. So now we have a mid-tone for the messy, a light tone for the bleeding splatter, and for this rounded splatter, we're going to have a darker color. And let's see, I'm going to bring down the size of this to, I think 8% looks pretty good. Okay, and then to finish everything off, we want it to look like it's on actual watercolor paper. So we're going to come up to the very top, create a brand new layer, label this one texture. We're going to change our color to black, so double tap where black is, and then come down here and grab your medium tooth paper texture. Make sure it's at max size, zoom out from your canvas, and paint in one continuous stroke over the top of your canvas. And then change the blend mode of this to multiply. And now, when we get nice and up close, it looks like it's on real watercolor paper. So that's how to create an easy watercolor 4-leaf clover directly in Procreate. If you're interested in learning more about digital watercolor by painting watercolor florals and foliage, I actually have an entire online course on that subject, and I will leave a link in the video description. Also in the video description is the source image for this project, as well as my watercolor illustration brush set. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please hit the like button, subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell icon so you can be notified of new tutorials just like this one in the future. For more Procreate tutorials and freebies, head on over to my site, every-tuesday.com. You can also find me over on Instagram. My handle is everytuesday. If you try this out and post it there, I would love it if you tag me. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next week.